How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Loud Podcast. And today our special guest is Angela Bacca. She is the editor of my book, Cannabis Breeding, the editor of High Price, the Cannabis Cancer Connection, the original cannabis prohibition in California, Cannabis in Clinical Practice, and so many other books. She's touched the work of so many other individuals in the cannabis industry, and she works for Oaksterdam as well. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we worked together every day for about 9 months, literally. And you got me focused in a way that most people could never get me focused. And I think part of that was that you were waking up at 4 a.m. and I was waking up at 5 a.m. And it's hard to find people that kind of match your speed when it comes to work, especially early morning like that. Not everybody likes waking up and working first thing right out of bed, but that was my way of finishing this book. And yeah, you're a big reason the book is actually here, that we have a printed version of it. So thank you so much for that.
Of course.
And you contributed the book, beyond editing and going, I think perspective and so many different things. And the whole getting me focused part was great because I'd been working on this book for 5 years and tried writing this book over and over, and I didn't have it exactly how I wanted it. And finally we figured it out. There was this recipe for success. I wrote this draft. I think the draft was pretty good by the time you got it. And then we still had a lot of refining to do and a lot of work, more than I would have ever expected would go into something we put into that book.
It was a really fun project for me to work on because I've worked on a lot of horticulture content and a lot of genomics content, but I still had this blind spot when it came to breeding, and getting to do this book filled in all of the blind spots. So that was really fun for me.
Yeah, it's funny. From the outside, breeding seems like A plus B equals C, and it's so much more complicated than that. And there's so much more involved. It's one thing making seeds, but actually breeding and breeding towards goals and breeding intention, depending on what you're looking for an outcome. There's just so many different directions.
See, that's funny to me because the way I've distilled it to people when I explain to them, I understand breeding now, is It's growing, except you take notes and pay attention.
Yeah. Record. It's a lot of data collection. And I think like with our facility, that's what we do. It's data collection, collecting data on everything. And I'm one of those people, I like collecting data. I like looking at things over time. It's, growing flower, it's like you're looking at that harvest and maybe you're looking at the next harvest. How can I improve it? But with genetics, you're looking like, how can I improve it over time? And what is that thing that I created and how can I make it better? You're trying to improve the gene pool as opposed to taking away from the gene pool, which I think is what a lot of people do, not intentionally, but I think a lot of people are just breeding to breed and to make seeds.
And you're looking at the whole plant, right? You're not just looking at the end product. Like You're looking at every little detail about how it grows and its environment. And I think that gets lost a lot when we talk about cannabis varieties because everyone just wants to know what kind of high they're going to get.
Yeah, or, I think we have an overemphasis on look and bag appeal, and we need to go back to like, how does it make me feel? Like I've been talking about that a lot on the show. It's like, ever since my friend Dave passed, Dave Mesford.
He was in the book.
Yeah, and he passed on 4/20. And so we've put a re-emphasis at our facility on how does it make you feel? At the end of the day, what are we doing this for? We're doing this for the effect, the medical benefit, whether you want it for recreational or whatever, it's medical at the end of the day. So I think Dennis Perrin said it best a long time ago. It's
funny because even with my lowered tolerance now, some of my favorite varieties I've ever smoked were some old hippies, 1970s strains. Like they're just so much more pleasant than a lot of the stuff today.
Yeah, there's such a wide variety of stuff. I mean, we've kind of pigeonholed ourselves into this gelato market, especially in the Bay Area. But then if you drive up to Humboldt or you go to Mendocino or you go over to any of the other countries, there's a lot more variety. And we need to get back into the variety and looking at what's going to improve the vigor of the plant, what's going to have long-term improved effects on the plant. I think that's so important.
Well, and I know as a patient, that's what I get excited about. When I walk in a dispensary and I see what's there, it's the variety that gets me excited. It's not one thing or the other thing. It's the options. And I think that that's what we get lost on too. There's never going to be the one thing. I want lots of things.
Yeah, me too. I think it's so subjective to the individual, as you've written in other books as well, that what one person likes isn't necessarily what the next person likes or needs. And it's so subjective to the individual. across the board. And some people like that narcotic effect, and some people like that, the stimulant effect. And some people like somewhere in the middle. And then some people just like hanging out and feeling a little bit,
I want the stimulant every time. I want the thing that's going to narrow me in and focus. And actually, I've just started playing with THCV strains.
Yeah.
A friend of mine from Phylos actually sent down an extract called Get Shit Done.
Nice.
And when I smoked that, it didn't taste very good. It didn't look very good. The first thing I did was made this like big list of like the cleaning projects and the work projects I was going to take on. And, I did it.
Yeah. THCV has, it's funny because you sent me a picture of the ratios of THCV in one of the products that you got. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, these, it's like, we're talking about huge percentages, and it's an extract, but we're talking about 2 to 1. And then I start reading more on some of the stuff that was in our book, what was
Pink Boost Goddess.
The Pink Boost Goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And the Pink Boost Goddess, they're breeding it into a 1-to-1 now, which is leaps and bounds from the stuff we were looking at like 8 years ago, where it was like showing up as a small percentage, and I think I've been turned off by the THCV as straight THCV. It doesn't do anything for me that I enjoy. I don't like the effect really, but maybe as a full spectrum product, I would. I think
I only try the full spectrum products anymore. I've already learned that lesson. I'm not ever interested in anything that's isolated or artificially high in one cannabinoid.
Yeah. I mean, I got a vial of pure THCV and I was dabbing it and trying it. And then waking up in the morning and trying it, and then trying it in the afternoon after I'd smoked a bunch. And the effect, it got me high, but it didn't get me like an enjoyable high. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like I wanted to go smoke more of it. It was more like I was trying it because I'd heard okay, well, it helps with if you're on a diet, it helps with appetite suppression, and it helps with all these things and focus. I've heard a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
And for me, that wasn't the case, and I think I get a lot of that from just plain THC. If I'm looking for appetite suppression, I need a sativa or something that's more of that equatorial, that basically is that stimulant side, and then I'm not hungry, and I get that just from stuff that's like super silver haze. I don't feel like eating necessarily, but if I smoke the narcotic stuff that's very strong, the first thing I want to do is eat some food or some Granddaddy Purple.
But see, we ask too much of cannabis, right? Like we're trying to alter all these cannabinoids to get these different effects, but there's already an herb out there that suppresses your appetite and your sugar cravings, which is Ginestra sylvestre.
Yeah.
And I might be saying that wrong. But that will do exactly what we're trying to get THCV to do. So it's so funny to me that we're going so hard on breeding THCV up for this thing when it already exists. Pink
Boost Goddess is really cool. I think
was cool.
There's a great section in the book on Pink Boost Goddess, and I feel like Dale Hunt is an amazing. He wrote a whole chapter for the book. There's a couple people. Matt Schneider from Apical Biotech wrote the tissue culture chapter, and as we were working together, this book became so much bigger than just the James Loud book of breeding. It's like, okay, well, James Loud, my name is on the cover, but it's the contribution of over 20 people and their hard work, and a complete chapter from Dale Hunt, a complete chapter on tissue culture from Matt, and then Mojave did contribution. Reggie Gaudino, he was like one of the most valuable people contributing to the book because he was questioning me on do you mean this or do you mean this? Because the way you're writing it, it says this, but I think you're meaning this, or maybe you're meaning this, and I want to know. And so then he made me do a lot of thinking, which is good.
I was so surprised by Reggie because we thought Reggie was just going to come in and kind of do an accuracy check, but he did a line edit. He really read the book and picked out pieces, and I think it's better for Reggie's line edit. And I always admired Reggie before this experience, but totally. I admire him tenfold now after working with him on this book.
Yeah, so Reggie, he's just amazing. I mean, I thought that he was just going to come in and read it and give me his opinion on whether it was even worth publishing. And then he went in and just really read it in detail, gave us honest feedback. And, it's just amazing having people like that contributing. So, and someone of his caliber. I mean, he basically wrote the foreword in the book, and the foreword is it's the best foreword I've ever read in a book. And it happens to be in my book. So I'm really proud to have him as part of the contributing team that made this book so special.
I had fun working on that forward with him because I gave him a prompt and he wrote it, and I came back in, and what I was really trying to do is getting him to kind of pull some of his unique experience that people have not heard about or don't understand in cannabis, and using that to contextualize what he was doing. And I think he ended up liking the end product a little bit more because of it, because I kind of pushed him to talk about some things he wasn't going to talk about. And you can't hear about it unless you read the book.
Well, it's funny because I made a list of all the people that I would want to write the foreword for the book. And he didn't even seem like someone that would be attainable to have on, and he wasn't on the list because he was like, so there's a couple of people that I really look up to, and he's one of them. I met him a long time ago in the early days of Halent Labs, and back when Halent had just merged over in Berkeley. And so Reggie was there, and he was younger, no gray hair, but really just an amazing guy. And I really looked up to him, and I'm like, that guy is super smart and super amazing and just super friendly. He was always really nice. I feel like I was just starting to understand what breeding was back 10 years ago, and so just, I'm extremely blessed to have so many great people in the book. And then Hera, who did the layout, she's amazing.
Love Harley.
There was a lot of changes that we threw at her at the end, and she just went through and just did such a good job. I mean, everything is so special about the book. And then the cover, there's actually hidden designs in the cover that we put in there. And Ben, who's the photographer, did that shot and did a little photo editing. And I feel like it's a super unique cover. Has
anyone ever actually found the hidden symbols in the cover and pointed it out to you without you saying something?
No, but if anybody can guess what they are, they get a free pack of seeds.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, randomly. So yeah, we'll do that on the podcast if you guys have the book, because a lot of people that watch our show have purchased the book, and there's other symbols in the book. There's all kinds of stuff. So it was a fun project. If you would have told me how crazy it was going to be before I wrote it, I probably would never have done it. 5 years ago when I first had thought about doing it, I didn't realize what writing a book meant.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have so much more respect for these other authors that have written these great books. There's just so much to go in, even smaller books. It's just so much energy and so much time if you want to write something good. And then all you can do is write the best book that you can do, and then you put it out there for the world, and the world interprets it however the world interprets it. So,
and they've been interpreting it pretty positively, right?
I think so. I think it's been really good. We're still getting sales. So, I mean, I think that's a good sign. And I think the book is really well-rounded. And this is just the beginning. We're going to do more versions down the road. I don't know when, but I'm sure we both need breaks for a little bit before we do another version.
I will say I have read almost every grow book that has ever been published. Everything that even kind of touches on cannabis breeding. There is nothing like this book right now. Yeah. The way it's organized, the story it tells, but also the information it gives. Like, I walked away understanding breeding, and I always thought that was the most complicated thing in cannabis.
Yeah.
And I don't anymore, because it's not that complicated, but nobody has sat down and actually put it to words in the same way. Yeah. So I think it's just so cool that this book exists.
Yeah, me too. And it's something, it's like I've always wanted, I think part of growing up for me has been like, how do I contribute to this bigger thing that we're all part of? And I feel like I found where my contribution lies within the genetics and within the breeding, and to be able to write a book. It's just, as you get older, it's like, what's your legacy? What are you leaving behind? And you have your legacy with all these books that you've edited. And, with the stuff with Oaksterdam, and I feel like you've contributed heavily to so many people. And I feel like I want to be the Gore-Tex for all these big brands with my genetics. And you're kind of like the Gore-Tex for all these authors. And it's just amazing, and I think that we're an extremely special time in the cannabis space because it's not stable yet. We're not quite sure where it's going. There's still a lot of information to be discovered. That's why there's going to be more breeding books. We haven't got it all down.
No, but yours was the first that's going to unleash the rest, I think.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to other people writing cannabis breeding books. I think there's a need for it. Everyone has their own opinion on it. There's different directions we can go. My book kind of has everything, and I feel like if people want to dive into some of those specifics, there could be a whole book on tissue culture for cannabis. You could write 400 pages on that.
So this is what excites me about this book and what excites me about cannabis in general, right? I don't think in any other field of plant science, people have gotten this excited about breeding as they do about cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a whole world of plants out there to breed. And I think this might open the door for people to start talking about that. Like I was saying with appetite suppression, we're all obsessed with breeding THCV and creating it from yeast and creating patent medicines from it. There's a whole world of plants that already do these same things.
They got Ozempic.
There's a plant that does the same thing that suppresses the GLP-1 receptor.
Wow.
Right? I think it's called Burberry, but don't quote me on that, right?
But there are plants out there.
My big hope with cannabis after all of these years, especially as a patient, has always been that cannabis busts the door open on plants in general, but also on healthcare, because we've had this inordinate focus on single cell molecules as being able to cure and treat things. They do not cure and treat things, neither do plants. But when you start understanding the components of plants, and we've never studied anything more than we've studied cannabis at this point,
right?
Then you start kind of like rethinking how you look at healthcare. And it's kind of an incredible thing that cannabis is able to do for us.
Totally. I mean, we use plant medicine for thousands of years, and we've only gone away from it with modern medicine in the last 200 years.
Well, and even with modern medicine, we have this thing where we say, oh, we know this plant is medicinal. Yeah. We're going to isolate one compound from it because that's the thing that does this. It's never the thing that does this. And that's also what cannabis is teaching us. So there's a whole host of molecules. Flavonoids, terpenes, they exist in other plants.
Oh, yeah.
The endocannabinoid system does not exist to interact with cannabis. It exists to interact with all of the foods that we eat that come from the earth, as well as herbs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this stuff is all over the place. I mean, cannabinoids are in breast milk. So we have these receptors in our body.
Thank God it puts the babies to sleep.
Right. Totally. And I mean, we have these receptors in our body. There's a reason for it. And I think we really need to explore it. And now, the laws are changing. The landscape is changing to where we can do a lot more research. And there's so many people interested. And it also is normalizing cannabis. We have guys like Luke Scarmazzo that did 14 years in prison for a plant. And I think it's pretty wild.
I'll correct that. I don't think Luke did 14 years in prison for a plant.
Yeah.
I think Luke did 14 years in prison for telling the feds to fuck themselves.
Yeah.
I think that's 100% why he did that prison time.
Yeah.
His free speech.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So like, how free are we? I guess it's all just a difference of opinion, but.
Well, when even half the cannabis industry says to you, when you talk about Luke's case and they go, well, he made that music video where he said, fuck the feds,
right? As
if he deserved it, right?
Yeah.
When like freedom of speech is central to who we are as Americans. You even have people in the cannabis industry defending that as a reason to put him behind bars.
That's really sad. And it's just, there's so many instances of this that have happened time and time and time again. But then cannabis is still, we circle back to cannabis is like the bad guy, right? And slowly but surely we are normalizing it. People like yourself putting this in books, podcasts where we're talking about it, where you get the normal person that ends up finding this podcast, they watch it and they can relate to something that you're saying or I'm saying. And then all of a sudden, wow. Or they know somebody that had cancer. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad because they had cancer and it helped them eat when they had cancer and they survived. These miracles. We had Maya from Oman and she gave us a different perspective on it. She's really amazing.
What was her different perspective?
Well, it was just basically these miracles that people experience, and she pointed that out. And I think my mom and dad saw Sanjay Gupta on 60 Minutes and saw that these kids were like not having epilepsy, or not epilepsy, but they weren't having seizures, right? And so it changed the seizure. They're having all these seizures. They started taking CBD and then the seizures went away. And so I think that was the big changing point for my parents. But like a lot of people, they see these miracles. And so these miracles, once you have a miracle happen to one of your friends or your family, then you realize maybe this isn't so bad. And maybe we were looking at it the wrong way.
Okay. So can I talk to you about Utah just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. So when I was living in the Bay Area for 10 years. And then I had my husband, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was living in Salt Lake City. We both have family there. And the rents were flying in Oakland. And he's like, if you live with me, your rent will be $300 a month. So I moved to Salt Lake City and decided to travel back to the Bay Area once a month so I can still work, because I was the editor of Cannabis Now at the time.
Right.
So I was coming back doing my cannabis thing every 6 weeks or so, and then going back to Utah. Our apartment was at the base of Capitol Hill in Salt Lake City, right where the Capitol is. And I moved there months before Utah became the first state to pass a CBD only law. I immediately made a friend with someone who was lobbying up there for CBD. And so I immediately fell headfirst into the situation where I was trying to explain cannabis to Mormons, right?
Wow.
And for them, it was very much like they love hearing miracle stories. Mm-hmm. And that was also what pushed cannabis into the legislature and said into the Utah legislature, was these stories of these children with epilepsy. Mm-hmm. What was interesting is I started I got sidelined right away. I was introduced to one of the Mormon moms who was running the bill, and she had looked me up on the internet, and she said right away, I saw you. You're from the Bay Area. You're friends with gays and legalizers, right?
Wow.
She's like, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. So I immediately got behind the scenes and started kind of whispering in the ear of people about what to say to these legislators. So by 2014, the CBD bill is happening. On 2015, I'm hiding in the office of Senator Mark Madsen, who is the grandson of the Mormon prophet, and also the first person to run a full medical cannabis bill in Utah. And he was sitting there saying, I need someone to talk about this. I'll call up a friend who's a researcher on this 1 second, right? So I'm connecting him to everybody. And so it was this whole miracle situation in Utah that had their belief in magical thinking that really turned them on to cannabis. You go to Utah now, you will not hear a conservative senator say a bad thing about cannabis.
Right.
Because we turned the tide on these medical stories. And I still can't get over how the culture changed because of these stories. And it really is because of the patients. Again, we really passed legalization in so many states because of money. Mm-hmm. People wanted tax money. People wanted to make money. But what really got the conversation going were these stories of patients. And I definitely taught Mormons how to dab.
Oh, wow.
I taught Mormons about cannabis. And I feel like that was really my time to do God's work, if you will, because I helped spread it in a place where it was never going to spread.
Yeah, I sold a bunch of seeds over in Utah and, for medical. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty amazing. I mean, I think they have a really good climate for growing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well,
it's hot, dry, high altitude.
So they did really good with my seeds.
Okay.
They did really good. In fact, I was really impressed. They did some indoor and, it was also really amazing. But also the cultivator, really good guy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Utah, I think I was super surprised with that. When I heard that someone from Utah wanted my seeds, I was like, really? And then I had to look are they even legal? Is this guy going to go, he wanted a lot of seeds. And I'm like, okay, well, really interesting.
The patients who had tried to pass that bill in the legislature the year I was working there, so that was 2015. Yep. It lost. My husband graduated grad school and we're like, let's get the fuck out. Yep. So we moved to Portland, Oregon almost immediately. But the patients who left behind, they didn't stop. The ones who were working on that bill became the chief petitioners of Prop 2, which passed in 2018. And now Utah is a medical cannabis state.
Totally.
Right. Totally weird.
Producing in the state. There's a lot of people producing in the state.
Yeah. It's funny though. They're producing a lot of bad weed in Utah.
I wouldn't be surprised. Although I have seen, I have pictures of some amazing stuff that was produced in Utah. So
there's only 8 growers.
Oh, wow.
Only 8 legal growers, right? And so there's 80,000 registered patients in the state of Utah. Less than 20,000 or so actually use the dispensaries.
A lot, but most of it's bad.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing about Utah, right? Colorado is a day drive away. Yep. Nevada is a day drive away. Some parts of Oregon are a day drive away, right? Yeah. So they're not really buying Utah weed.
Oh, wow. That makes sense. Mm-hmm. It makes sense. And I just can't wait for the day for interstate commerce. It's so silly that we're still having this conversation that we can't legally cross state lines with cannabis. You can do whatever you want, but as far as federally illegal, it's still federally illegal. There's no interstate commerce. So we can't produce a shit ton in California and then go sell to Utah or North Dakota or South Dakota. Or
Utah wants our weed.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And that's something I was feeling, especially talking to some old friends at the Emerald Cup and getting to talk to other people in the California industry, because California is my home. California cannabis is hurting. They're really hurting. And until they can legally ship things out that they were already sending anyway before legalization happened, they're going to continue to hurt.
Well, and they're going to continue to do stuff the traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the best solution is for them to, at the very least, even if they don't want to go federally legal, allow interstate commerce from legal state to legal state. Rec to rec,
oh
medical
no, we
to
have
medical.
to let the world experience California cannabis. There's already a demand for it. When I was in Spain in 2022, apparently in the clubs in Barcelona, they brag about it being Cali weed, right? Of course, nobody from California says Cali.
Sure.
But that's still the thing. They all want Cali weed, just the way people want Napa wine.
Well, it's mostly California genetics. And I think we're the epicenter right here in California, the Bay Area, Los Angeles. I would say West Coast, but like really California is always, Oaksterdam, Oakland has been, there's a reason it's called Oaksterdam because we were the epicenter for the longest time, especially 215 days. It was like booming genetics wise too. So they want the best. And I've seen a lot of stuff in Europe that says Cali. It's definitely not Cali. It could be Canadian, but it's not necessarily California.
But that's how they sell it, right?
Oh,
They're putting California on
People
the label.
are like, ooh, California, in the Netherlands, in Spain, all over. But slowly it's becoming normalized. We got Germany going online, big countries that are going recreational as a country. And I love that. We got Jamaica we got some islands and we have, I think Colombia still has a long ways to go, but they have potential. Mexico, they're going to go fully rec.
I can't wait till Mexico goes.
Yeah, I mean, once these things start to unfold, and then we got Canada and Mexico, and they're fully rec, we have to do it. I just think it's silly. I mean, I think it's silly now.
It's totally silly now, but also like for the sake of all the people we know and love, like we need to be able to send cannabis out of California.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really, most of the market demands Californian weed.
Well, yeah, I mean, and the thing is I think other states produce amazing. Oregon produces amazing flower. They produce
Oregon's
so much
just
of it.
far north California. Let's get real. They'll hate me for saying that, but it's the truth.
I would say the best growing climate in the whole United States is actually like Southern Oregon.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So,
but it's that region, right? The far north of California, the far south of Oregon. Like that is where some of the best weed comes from. Yeah,
especially, I mean, the outdoor weed. Indoor can be grown good anywhere.
Right.
Anybody who knows environment and can control your environment fully, you can cure it correctly, you can grow good flower anywhere. Pretty much anywhere. But outdoor, I feel like there's only a limited amount of places that you can really, that really perform well as a whole. You can grow autoflowers in certain places that you wouldn't normally be able to do. Alaska's kind of special. They have a really short growing season, really long light. I think autoflowers go really well there.
That's where autoflowers came from, is up at the top of the poles, right?
Right. For sure. So it's really interesting moving forward, genetic wise, also regional, and being able to, we talk about in the book a little bit about breeding for specific regions. And I think people are starting to get back to that. I mean, obviously the big companies are looking at that, but I think a lot of breeders, it's on their mind is like, especially if they're breeding for outdoor where they want to produce seeds. They go on an acre. It's like, well, are those the optimal seeds for that location? As far as climate, as far as elevation and all these other things, it's like, is that the optimal variety for that? And so
I think that's the problem with a lot of these other states like Utah too, is they're trying to grow popular varieties that were bred in California.
Well, that's happening all over the world. It's like, I got guys in the Caribbean that want to grow OG Kush, and it's like, that's not necessarily, and the thing is maybe you want to grow an OG hybrid, but you don't want to just grow OG Kush. And it's not, or you just, it's like, I want to grow gelato and I want to grow it in the Caribbean.
But I can't wait for the day that they try to breed strains that are for where they are. Yeah. And they have that uniqueness to them, because any foodie will tell you too, like that's part of why I like going different places to try different things, not to get the same thing grown in a different climate. Right.
And all this will happen over time. We're going to repopulate the world with landrace genetics over the next 100 years. And so, through taking genetics everywhere, finding out what works the best, it's going to be 100 years from now. It's going to be pretty wild. If we're all, obviously we won't be around 100 years from now, but the plant will still be alive.
Okay. This is a question I have coming from working on your book.
Yeah.
What is a landrace?
So a landrace is not, a lot of people get confused. They think landrace is feral. but landrace is not, that's feral. If we're talking about feral, the stuff that's indigenous or feral to that region that's grown on its own and it's populated and through natural selection, that is not what landrace is. Landrace is something that's grown for several generations and selected by the people for a specific use or purpose. And that's what
most people don't know that.
Right. But landrace genetics, is Mojave said it best, once it leaves the land, the race is over.
Right.
Right. And so I have this huge collection of landrace genetics where we're using it for breeding potential. And so where we can test it out in different regions and then hybridize it and see how those hybrids work. I have my friend Fritzy. He's going around next month. He'll be over in Asia looking for more seeds for us. And we're constantly looking for new things for the gene pools so that we can test it and see how it performs and how it can benefit us. But I think as a whole, even in 10 or 15 years, the landscape is going to change completely breeding. I mean, there's a lot of science going into it, but, geoclimatized, we use the word geoclimatized in the book. Mm-hmm. And Reggie told me that was a good idea, by the way, to use geoclimatized. I've been criticized by people for using the word geoclimatized because it's almost like you're putting new landrace genetics in places and optimizing those for the specific conditions that
But you
exist.
are.
Yeah, that's the idea, right?
That's the point.
It's trying to optimize genetics for specific locations. And, that's the future. That's the future of genetics. And I think to say that everybody's just going to grow indoors, that's silly. I think we have this amazing light called the sun. Mm-hmm. And if we can utilize that either wholly or partially. I do love mixed light because I feel like it gives you a mix of an amazing product that gets the benefit of the sun and the light and the control of the environment.
Well, and we know that THC production is a response to UV light, right? Yeah. And so that's what's exciting about people actually starting to breed in different parts of the world beyond California is that there's a different spectrum of light in different places. That's what's going to bring out different cannabinoids.
Right.
Different terpenes, different flavonoids, different everything.
Yeah, and you can take, the beauty of this plant is you can take OG Kush or any other cultivar that you know, and you can grow it here outdoors. You can grow it in Washington. You can grow it in Texas, in some parts of Texas, some parts of Arizona,
Texas,
Mexico, or Costa Rica, or the Caribbean. And if you were to take that flower and put it side by side, it would all look like a different expression because phenotype is basically affected by nutrition and environment. So the second you change the environment, you can have a completely different looking plant with different terpene expressions or flavorants, as we call them in the book, thanks to the white papers from Abstract Tech.
That was an interesting thing that happened while we were working on the book, right? Like everyone was very focused on terpenes as far as flavor and smell. And that study came out while we were working on the book. And we had to reorient how we thought about these things while we were writing it.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit about thiols. And then once they came out with those white papers, it was like, okay, it's on. We need to change the book. And that was actually really cool. I love watching science unfold in real time. It's like, them discover, these are sulfur-based compounds and talking about sulfur-based compounds and thiols on another level, because we just talked about thiols being like, the gas, the skunk, the ammonia that you smell and stuff. And they started really, I think they changed history on a level that people haven't done in a long time, especially when we're having this conversation about just terpenes, because everyone's so focused on saying this terpene or this terpene. And it's like, it's just limonene. And it's so much more than that a lot of times.
It's hard for us to get out of this mindset of a single molecule.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're all so focused on this one thing, doing this one thing. And that's just not nature.
Right.
That's not how nature works.
Well, and if it gets me really high, it must be THC. And that's not the case.
Right? And I can't wait for the moment when we don't care about THC in the same way. People don't buy wine by looking at the alcohol content and going, oh, well, this is the highest alcohol. It must be the best wine.
Some bums do, but most people do not.
Right.
So what was your favorite part about editing the book?
Okay. My favorite part about editing your book, right, was I had known you, but I didn't know you that well yet. And you have a background in the chef's world, right? Like a culinary experience. And so when we got to a part where you were talking about breeding based on flavors and flavor pairings, that kind of spoke to me as an amateur chef. a lot. And so I kind of got really into that, especially because I know when people pick out varieties, they're always looking at how different flavors and scents make you feel and how you seem to be naturally attracted to things that will make an effect that you like. Talking to you made me buy the Flavor Bible.
Yeah, it's one of the best books out there.
Oh, I took it home. And it's like I cook all my own food from scratch, raw ingredients because of my Crohn's disease, right? And so that chapter like spoke to me in a way that I like went home and started like studying flavor pairings in a way. And so that was really a cool experience to me of like, don't just enjoy cannabis, don't just sniff stuff and smoke that you like, but like really make this thing exactly what you want it to be. And like, that's kind of what I pulled from your book, which was cool. And you could only get that from a chef's perspective.
Yeah. And there, the thing is with breeding, there's so many different directions you can go and there's no one right way to do it. And everybody has their own way. And especially with the selection process, because it's so subjective to the individual. And I think, as a chef, there's some breeders that they just breed what they want and what they would smoke. And I think that's a great way to do it too.
Cool, bro.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But like, oh, this is what I love and I'm going to breed this because I love this. And that's a beautiful approach too. But my approach is as a chef is I know what people like, right? As a chef, you have to learn what people like. Even though I like weird stuff, I like weird food. I love
it. Great.
Yeah. And so I like exotic stuff and I like octopus with olive oil and crunchy salt.
Cool. Want to try it now that you said it.
Yeah. It's so good, especially Mediterranean octopus is just amazing. And then it has, especially if you do it right with the potatoes, you have soft potatoes, and then a little paprika on there. And it's like this flavor combination. It's amazing. But I dissect cannabis just as I would food. And I reverse engineer everything that I do. I'm constantly like, okay, how can we pull this apart and look at it from each component and try to optimize it, whatever it is. And then it goes with cannabis, it's like, there's so many different things too. Like it also, this day and age, we want stuff that will function in a large scale facility. It's not just something that like, even though I love breeding for flavor, and we might save something that's really amazing, we won't necessarily release a cut of it or anything like that. But we have that and we have that on the back burner. We can use it for breeding because it's so special. Most of it has to be commercially viable.
Of course.
Right. And so unfortunately, unfortunately, these are all just breeding goals that you have. Like if you're going to sell seeds, people want to get a certain yield off them. And so that's just a reality.
Sure.
And so that needs to be one of the check boxes. Like, does it yield or what does it yield? So you can inform people.
So, but what is lost when we focus on yield or THC, right? And I think that is like the education that the consumer market is missing, right? It's same with food. If we focused on the apples that produced the most, we want to get the apples with flavor.
Yeah.
And we don't understand that. And I can't wait till cannabis kind of comes around to these understandings we already have from eating.
Right. Well, and there is a balance, right? So like there's a balance and a threshold, and there's a point where it's like if it yields so much, it's probably not going to taste amazing.
Never.
So there's a range.
Commercial agriculture is high yields translate to great flavor.
Totally. You look at wine, you look at produce, you look at pretty much everything. And a lot of times they're having to pump synthetics into it to get it to produce like that.
What are the best tomatoes?
Heirloom tomatoes.
The ones someone grew at home.
Yeah. Grown by grandma or grown by me or whoever it is. It's like those, absolutely.
And I'm an Italian. I make a lot of delicious tomato sauce, and I will not make a tomato sauce with store-bought tomatoes.
Yeah. You got to go to Berkeley Bowl. And even
have to go to a good store and get the fancy tomatoes.
But right? Even the fanciest tomatoes at the best stores aren't as good as the stuff that comes off of my vines at my house.
Mm-hmm. The ones that make your fingers smell like tomatoes because of the terpenes.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I do the stem rub and I get that. I love that green smell. Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and it's like I love tomatoes too, and I have Crohn's as well, and so I really don't eat a lot of tomatoes because they're nightshades.
Everybody has Crohn's now.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a digestive disorder now.
So totally, autoimmune diseases are just at an all-time high for sure.
I have some theories about it.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of it is immune stuff in general, right? Is like there was a study that was done on the border of Poland and Russia.
Yeah.
Poland is part of the EU. Russia is not. And in Poland, it's like super sterile. Like in their train stations, they keep that shit sterile.
Yeah.
Don't do the same thing in Russia, right? You can also map out incidences of autoimmune disease on that border and find that they are like 10x higher on the Poland side than they are on the Russia side, despite people having similar genetics.
Yeah. The sterility is on the side where everybody has it.
Totally. But I also think it's Western civilization and the diets that we live on here.
I think so too. Role. And I think there's so many contributing factors. It's not just one thing, I think. Glyphosate is a huge one. And then just our diets, we're not eating as nutritious of produce and as, I think the protein has changed. We used to have more diversity in our diets. And then you look at the lettuce and things like that. And it's completely different than it was in the 50s and before. And so I think pesticides changed after World War II, and that has an effect on it, possibly. I mean, I'm not an expert on all this, and I'm always trying to think about like why I am the way I am, because I have a lot of food allergies, a lot. And also cannabis helps, even though I have a slight cannabis allergy it gives me a little rash, which it does to a lot of people. We get rashes, but the actually ingesting it helps me if I smoke it more than if I eat it. I don't really feel great when I eat it, as great as I do when I smoke it.
I don't like eating weed. I never do. I always prefer to inhale, or tinctures at best, but I prefer inhaling.
Yeah, tinctures are okay. I'm okay with some tinctures. Amber alchemy tinctures are really good.
The best tincture I have ever had, I made myself. And here was what was in it. I was using a volcano vape.
Yeah.
And I was dumping my leftover vape into a jar. And then I put some fresh bud in there. And then I put some fresh decarboxylated bud in there. So this was like a sausage of like cannabis leftovers. And I made a tincture out of that, and I've never felt better. And I handed it out to other patients that I knew. They loved the sausage leftovers,
I bet,
as well too. And I think it's because of the diversity, right? Like the diversity of what ended up in that jar at the end was something you can't recreate on a commercial level, but people loved it.
Well, and from one batch to the next, it's going to be completely different.
I couldn't recreate that tincture.
Exactly.
Never. I could never recreate that tincture.
Well, and that's, homegrown flower is a lot like that too. From one batch to the next, it comes out slightly different. And sometimes it's absolutely amazing. And anybody who says they grow A+++ weed every time, they're kidding themselves, because I feel like the best growers, it's always good. Like certain growers, myself included, I feel like it's always good when I grow, but there's times where it's just above and beyond. That was a special round, or the genetics just performed really well that time, or you get to know a certain cultivar, and then you're like, okay, well, I know that we need to veg it a little bit longer, and then we need to top it a few times, and it really loves when I clean out the undercarriage completely and thin quite a bit more than other things. And some things, they don't like to be thinned the same. So knowing your cultivars is like half the battle.
I wrote this article about cannabis and Crohn's in 2013, and it went viral. And I've had people to this day still reaching out to me about it, and I regret it. And I regret it because I made it sound like cannabis is what put my Crohn's in remission. And I didn't understand at the time that was not the case.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important thing to talk about, because I've had so many people reach out to me, and the main question they ask is, what's the strain I should use for my Crohn's disease? And they hate me because every single time I give them this long, complicated answer that the TLDR is, I can't give you that answer.
Yeah.
Right? There is no good answer for that. Like cannabis can't cure your Crohn's disease. There's no one thing that you can buy that's going to cure your Crohn's disease. You need to get sleep. You need to get hydration. You need to eat a whole food diet. You need to cut out sugar and processed foods. All of these things feed
totally
your
avoid fried
endocannabinoid
foods.
system.
Yeah. I think for me, fried foods was the worst. But also, I got Crohn's worse. It came out of remission fully when I quit smoking.
Oh yeah, cigarettes are terrible for it.
Yep. Well, cannabis. When I quit smoking cannabis. And forced to quit.
Mm-hmm.
But I quit smoking, and I was fine for like the first 6 months, and then I got like the worst I'd ever had, and I lost about 25 pounds in a month.
Why were you forced to quit smoking?
The federal government.
Oh.
So yeah, I had to pee, and it was really bad. So they'll do that.
I read this study called Care and Feeding of the Endocannabinoid System. That is really what changed my perspective on a lot of this, because it was a survey study. So it's not just a study where they look at 15 people and report their results. It is researchers looking at the body of research that exists and summarizing it.
Yeah.
They looked at pharmaceutical drugs, alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, anything that can affect your endocannabinoid system, what balances it, what upregulates it, what downregulates it. And what they found was what keeps the balance in your endocannabinoid system was sleep, hydration, exercise, whole food diet, right? So these aren't things I can sell to anybody. And nobody ever wants me to say this to them, that there's not one thing that'll fix this, but that is what will fix it, is a radical lifestyle change. And it's not the easiest thing to do.
It's not. And I think a lot of it for me starts with exercise. Like I've lost a lot of weight this year. And it started with just going to the gym and waking up and doing it. Even if I had to sit in the car 30 minutes and thought about going to the gym, if I got in there. And so, lifestyle changes aren't easy. And your mind will tell you the opposite, like, oh, you don't need to do this, or, oh, you're getting up a little later, so you don't need to go to the gym today, or you don't need to do this. And a lot of times you just got to prioritize yourself. That's what I found. We
also live these lives that are too busy. And that's kind of what makes our health degrade, right? It's really hard to schedule in gym time. It's really hard to schedule in time to make your food from scratch.
Right.
This is why people eat processed food, is because you can just throw it in your mouth while you're driving somewhere.
Right.
But you'll pay the price for that cheapness later.
Yeah, it's like I love cooking. As a chef, I love taking the whole day to prepare a meal. You go shopping and then you spend a few hours cooking, minimum a few hours, sometimes 5 hours cooking. And I love doing that. There's like this whole meditation side to that I love, like going back to like culinary school where I learned knife skills. And I love cutting my vegetables all exactly the same size and perfect dices.
Tiny little vegetables is what makes food so good.
Yeah, and all these things, but I don't have time for that. And so I eat pretty basic now, but like I'm able to cook my meals really fast. And I do a lot of whole food, like steak. I do steak and chicken.
Same.
And I do steak with chicken. Love steak by itself. I love chicken by itself, and I love them together. And I do these burritos now. They're like steak and chicken burritos. So.
See, and I was a vegetarian for 15 years, and I had to like break that seal to be able to get healthy, because basically I eat meat and vegetables now, and that has been my life-saving situation. I was a severe case of Crohn's. I've had a third of my colon surgically removed. Wow. And moving to a diet with no processed foods where I eat meat, fruits, vegetables has been kind of what has really put me in remission more than cannabis. The goal has been to not need cannabis unless I need cannabis. And I use cannabis instead of a Tylenol or something else.
Yeah. Did you do an elimination diet to figure out what worked and what didn't work?
Oh, absolutely. And so like the diet that I'm on is called the specific carbohydrate diet. And if it doesn't work for you, there's 4 things that you remove that are okay on the diet to see what's causing the problem.
Wow.
And it's eggs, nuts, legal sugars as they call it, which is from fruit and honey. And the other is dairy. And I found out depressingly that it's eggs for me. Like I just cannot eat eggs.
I can't do it. I love eggs. I do 10 egg whites before I go to bed every night.
Love them. They don't love me, right? So as soon as I cut eggs out of my diet, my life changed.
Wow. So then you tried, before you had any part of your intestines removed, did you, or your colon?
Colon.
Which is, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty serious operation.
People don't realize how important your colon is until there's a problem with it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And did you quit, you were smoking cannabis and tried that and it didn't fully work?
Okay, see, that's funny, right? Because I started smoking cannabis in high school. It turned my life around. I was intentionally failing myself out of honors classes in high school. I was in a Catholic high school. And I was so mad about it, right? So I was intentionally failing myself out of these classes. I get high for the first time and I'm just like, well, shit, if I go to college, I get to leave this bumfuck town, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden I start turning in straight A's and I start smoking cannabis. I was getting symptoms at about the exact same time.
Wow.
By the time I was diagnosed, I had just turned 18. I was days away from moving to San Francisco for college. And I had this weird mindset, which was like, well, you've got a serious illness now. You can't do drugs. So I stopped smoking weed. And my first 6 months in college at San Francisco State, I was completely miserable, cycling through prednisone and a bunch of other drugs and basically starving myself to get through the day so I wouldn't feel symptoms. I had emergency surgery during my spring break to remove the first section of my colon. And right after that, I started going to doctor's appointments in San Francisco all the time. And I'd pick up the free newspapers while I was on the bus. And on the back of the free newspapers was all kinds of cannabis ads, right? Yeah. So I go to a cannabis doctor for the first time and I go, got Crohn's disease. Is that enough to get a card? And they're like, oh yeah, definitely. Totally. Right. And so that was the first time I got a card and I didn't take it seriously. I was buying weed from my roommates because I was the one who could get into a club. But I definitely started moving towards being a more natural, organic type of person who didn't take pharmaceutical drugs because of that, because I'd walk into a dispensary. And at the time, like these old dispensaries in San Francisco where they're giving you a Ziploc bag with a computer printer label on the variety and people are smoking in the sales floor. But I met people in there who were patients and they were talking about being patients. And I started like thinking about my own use in a different way. And that's kind of what pushed me on the path that I ended up on.
There were some really cool clubs in San Francisco.
Oh my God, yeah. Gary and 14th was the big one for me.
14th and Mission. I used to go there quite a bit. And there was one on Ocean. I used to vend to all these places too. And then Spark in San Francisco.
Probably smoked
your weed. You never know.
Right?
Yeah. Mine or my friends or, Spark was a big deal for me back a long time ago. They were amazing. Great company. They bought CO2 when it was crude and were using it for edibles and doing all kinds of stuff. My friends got the first like Eden Labs extractor when it was for CO2, when it would just pump out peanut butter looking crude. Mm-hmm. It's disgusting. You couldn't really smoke it. They were trying to convince everybody that, yeah, you just smoke it and it's way healthier. But it was the crude of crude. It was like crude oil. And so it was smart. Spark ended up interested in purchasing it. So it kind of helped pay for their machine, which was great. At $20 a gram back then, which I think it's probably for that kind of stuff would be $1 a gram now or a couple dollars a gram. But yeah, and then, there was Steve D'Angelo and Andrew over at Harborside. They were doing it for a long time. And the third floor.
I knew Sean and Mary well.
Yeah.
I worked with them a little bit.
That's where my wife and I both got our cards. Frank Lucido was my first doctor that gave me my card.
Love Frank.
Yeah, he was amazing. Frank, he should have written a book. So he still could.
But
he can still write a book. He just retired.
Writing a book is not like a casual thing, right? No. Like it's a big fucking project.
It's an undertaking. And then, people don't know, most people don't know how much goes into a book as far as like, I didn't understand. I thought I could maybe do the layout or I could do the graphics or all that stuff. We had to get a graphic. We had multiple graphic designers, multiple photographers, an editor. We had Reggie who helped, and there was just so many people that contributed this or that, or a handful of photos. Like, okay, we need photos of landrace stuff. Well, I don't grow a ton of landrace genetics. I plan on, but as far as like, we went to several people, and and then people said, "Oh yeah, I got this," and then they don't respond. And
if you get them, they may not be high quality.
We went through that for sure. But yeah, and I was able to feature a lot of case studies in the book, and I thought that was a lot of fun.
I love doing text box case studies in books, especially like your book, because your book is a textbook, right? So there's an information load, but then there's also giving life to the information, and the text box give life to the information, and being able to talk about specific strains that people know, I think gives life to the content in a different way. That was fully
your idea, by the way. And so that just, and then you gave me the idea, and then it's like, okay, let's run with this. And we're going to talk about sour diesel. We'll do case studies on this and case studies on that. I think I wrote more case studies than we included in the book.
A lot of that came from the first grow book I ever worked on between 2008 and 2010. I was a student at Mills College at the time, and I had brought my own textbooks, knowing that we were making this one as an Oaksterdam textbook, and I was looking through it. And I remember that was the thing that stood out to me as case studies about different businesses to explain the business concepts we're talking about. So I pulled that into that first grow book that I did in a big way. And it's just something that's carried over in a lot of the cannabis textbooks that I've done, because there's giving information and there's giving life to information. And those text box, they just does it in a different way.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, so let's talk about High Price, because I think that is an amazing book. You're the one who introduced me to Luke Scarmazzo. I've had him on the show a couple times. We filmed some really cool stuff together. He's just an amazing person. And you met him when he was in prison.
Right. It's interesting because I heard about Luke a lot before I actually met him, because he was the guy who made the music video where he goes, fuck the feds. And the feds said, fuck you. And they put him into a federal prison with a 21-year sentence, right? And so right around the time that Obama was about to transition out and Trump was about to transition in, both Luke Scarmazzo's daughter and his partner, Ricardo Montez's daughter, were doing a change.org petition trying to get Obama to pardon their dads, right? And so I talked to Ricardo in prison. I talked to Luke in prison. It ended with Ricardo getting that clemency, but Luke didn't get the clemency. But I really enjoyed talking to Luke. So it turned into the situation where Luke and I kind of became pen pals for many years. And right before the pandemic, Luke ended up in solitary confinement for a long time. A long time. He traded a lot of his meals for paper and pen, and he wrote a book. And he knew what I did for work. So he was like, Angela, can I send you my book to check out? And I'm like, sure, okay. A lot of people have sent me books that they wanted to publish over the years, and I skimmed through them and I'm like, oh, this is too much. This is a mess. This will never happen. Luke's book, I sat down, I start reading. The next 3 or 4 days after, I woke myself up early. And you know I wake up early. I woke up even earlier, turned the coffee pot on so that I could plow through more of Luke's book because it was so well written and so engaging. And so when he did come out of prison, he was like, let's publish this book. I want you to do it. And what was interesting is the original version of the book ended with him in solitary confinement. And when you read the book at the way it was at the time, it was a tearjerker. Like I broke down crying at like 5 o'clock in the morning reading the ending of this book.
Wow.
Then he gets out of prison. Some time goes by. We're working on the book. And it's like, Luke, let's talk about prison a little bit, right? Because like the book doesn't talk about being in prison right now. It just talks about what happened leading into prison. So him and I went into this back and forth where we were talking about his prison experience, where we could really actually, the book is called High Price, to actually talk about the cost, like what life was like for 14 years in prison for Luke Scarmazzo. And I think what we pulled out of it just brought the book so full circle, but also made a stronger point than we could have made while he was still there, because now he can speak more freely about his experience. Yeah,
it's a really good book. I think it's really well written. And I've really enjoyed him coming out to the facility. And we're talking about doing some seed drops together and some other stuff. And I love seeing him travel, and, you know, his Instagram, he's a traveler. He's been going all over everywhere to events, whether it's the California State Fair, going over to the East Coast doing stuff. He was in Miami and, you know, in Florida, and he's been traveling all over. You know, his brand Profit is doing really well, and I think they're just growing exponentially. And it's great seeing someone like him who really deserves the success of recreational cannabis, you know, growing along with the system.
So first, Profit actually has good weed.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of good weed in the California market that's legal these days, right? That's the first thing. 2, Luke has an enthusiasm for this industry and this world in a way that other people in the industry definitely do not have right now, right? And that was born of spending 14 years mostly in solitary confinement. He's so happy to be here.
He's just happy to be here. He's just and he's always in a good mood. I love that about him. Him and Mandy are always in a good mood, and it's great seeing them. I mean, that kind of stuff is contagious.
He already became my friend when we were pen pals, but like now that I know him in the real life, like I just love that guy so much. Luke is so cool. Yeah, he's a blast. So tell us about your other books that you've been working on. I think the Cannabis Cancer Connection is really important. Okay, the Cannabis Cancer Connection is a really cool book. It's written by a guy named Joe Goldstrich. He's an MD, an FACC. And what's interesting about Dr. Joe is he started his career as a fellow in a hospital in Dallas. And he was one of the 7 people who was in the room when JFK came in with a head wound that took his life, right? Wow. And that really shaped Dr. Joe's experience. He became a pretty well-renowned cardiologist over his experience. He always smoked cannabis. He was always kind of health conscious. I mean, this was the 60s when he was coming up. And when after he retired, he found that he was like kind of depressed because he had nothing to do. So he had already been a California certified physician. He came out and started writing recommendations in California. And he just started learning from his patients. And as a patient, I appreciate that about a doctor, is that he learned from his patients. But one thing that really hit Dr. Joe was patients with cancer, because he was finding that some people were saying they were experiencing these miracle recoveries. And then he'd also have patients who did the same thing they read about online and they didn't have the miracle recovery, right? And because his background was in research and researching materia medica, which he used to get big paper stacks of research and go through them to understand, he made cannabis and cancer something that he just dove headfirst in. So this book is a summary of basically every piece of cannabis cannabinoid research that's ever been done in the world, summarized but contextualized with the patient experience, right?
Wow.
And so there's some pieces in there that explain, and he'll go into what I was saying earlier about the endocannabinoid system and diet and lifestyle and how all of that actually affects cancer care more than just the cannabis himself. He points out when you shouldn't use cannabis, when there are actually any HPV-related cancer, he points out in the book, does not respond well to THC. More importantly, there's a chapter in there about immunotherapy. And immunotherapy has become a really popular cancer treatment because for the people who have cancer that it affects, it really helps.
Wow.
It will just knock out your cancer, right? A lot of people are using cannabis for the symptoms of things like immunotherapy and chemotherapy. If you use cannabis while you're getting immunotherapy, it makes the immunotherapy not work. This was something he had pulled from the research, but now he's experiencing in real life because he was recently diagnosed with a cancer that responds well to immunotherapy. So he followed his own advice and the cancer is going into remission.
Wow.
So there's an update of this book coming soon, but I just really appreciate what he did with this book. It's really like his life's work. It's really cool.
That's awesome. So the origins of cannabis prohibition.
Okay. Dale Geringer, PhD, he is like the longtime head of California NORML, right? He's written this book, which is originally published in, I think, 1998. I might need to check that later on, right? He pulled out some pieces about how California became one of the first states in the United States to prohibit cannabis. Wow. Which is so hilarious considering we were the ones who busted this open for the world, right? And a lot of it was based on racism, which are the stories that we knew. And so this is just like a really interesting story that looks at the politics between like 1910 and 1913 that led to California like leading the way in cannabis prohibition.
Right. Nice. And then cannabis in clinical practice.
Okay. Cannabis in clinical practice was originally written by my really good friend, Dr. David Behrman. Anybody who knows Dr. David Behrman loves him. He's based in Santa Barbara, which is near my hometown. He worked for Governor Ronald Reagan's drug task force. He has some pretty interesting credentials, right? I first met him at HempFest in 2010 or 12, and I've worked on a handful of books with him.
Up in Seattle.
Oh, in Seattle. Yeah, definitely. It blew my mind that this like doctor that I had just met was like, hey, you want to smoke a joint on the rocks?
Nice.
Which is what everybody does at HempFest, right? But so I ended up sitting there and talking to him for a while, finding out that he was from Santa Barbara, which is near my hometown, which is in Santa Barbara County. So we became friends through that. Cannabis in clinical practice was him trying to put into words all of the information that doctors typically get about a drug that they're going to prescribe their patients, but they will never get for an herb, and especially not cannabis. So he put that all into this book. Then there's 4 authors on this book, right?
Wow.
The second author, Maria Pettinato, is teaching a cannabis class that was brand new at the College of Nursing at Seattle. So she adapted the content for her class. The next MD who jumps in is Dra. Carolina Noceri, who is from Brazil. And so she has like actually led medical cannabis in Brazil. She's testified in front of the Brazilian Congress for medical cannabis, but her and her team did deep studies into autoimmune diseases and a few other conditions and how cannabis affects that at the cellular level. So she amended the book finally. I took a final pass with this book from a patient's perspective and from a very educated patient's perspective. And that is what became this book, which is Cannabis in Clinical Practice. And it's basically everything a doctor needs to know before they start recommending cannabis to a patient.
That's awesome. Yeah, we need more books like that.
Oh my God, more books.
Yeah.
I hope people read books.
Well, I think digital books are a thing.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people like digital books, but I still like books. And that's why I wanted to write a book. And, it's Luke's book is great. And I don't really read books normally, but I like Luke's book was an exception. You got it to me early on, right when it was coming out. And it was a really, really good book. Books, yeah. Where do you think books are going?
It's interesting though, because I read a lot of books,
Yep.
and there's a lot of books I read that I don't necessarily want on my shelf, and I don't want other people around me to see that I'm reading, right? Just like trashy novels. Books like your book are the kind of book that I want on my bookshelf.
Yeah,
I want it as a reference that I can pull down, and so I think that that's kind of where books are going. There's the books that you want on your shelf, the books you don't want on your shelf. Your book is a book that I want on my shelf because it's the kind of thing where I need a quick fact. I know where to look for it. And I know your book like the back of my hand. So I know where to find what I'm looking for in there.
right. Well, you have the file. You can type search.
That's true. But so can anybody who gets the ebook.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. And then you also work with Oaksterdam, doing a lot of stuff with Dale over there. And Oaksterdam isn't just in Oakland anymore. You guys have spread out all over. You guys are working, in several countries. And you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I started working with Dale at Oaksterdam to produce a book, The Bud Tender's Guide, which was based on a lot of their curricula. And their curricula is excellent. People don't realize this. Dale brought me in as the director of academics. So now I produce all of the curricula at Oaksterdam University. And that has been such a crazy experience for me because it's definitely pulled on all of my skills, strengths, and knowledge in a way that no other job possibly could. So I really appreciate working with Oaksterdam because we're working with people who actually are going to have a major impact where they are, right? I'm from California, you're from California. We're all very saturated in the cannabis world. We're working with students who are opening businesses in places like Connecticut and New Jersey, and they have no background in the history of what is here or all of the weird, deep context that you and I might have on some of these topics. Right. So it's really exciting for us to be able to provide it, but it's really excited for them to be able to get that information from somewhere like Oaksterdam, where we have the most unique perspective. The other thing I think is really cool for me about working with Oaksterdam is I've known Jeff and Dale Jones for over 15 years, but I've always been Oaksterdam adjacent. I never worked exactly with them, but I was around during Prop 19. I was around while they were doing their thing. And so I've always understood the historical context of Oaksterdam and where they fall in this legalization movement. And I don't know that many people in the world really understand what Oaksterdam in particular did to make cannabis legal everywhere and for everyone. They may never know unless we keep talking about it, but Oaksterdam had the most central role in what is today.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. And I think, they were the epicenter. We called Oakland Oaksterdam, and then they started a school. And pretty amazing how many students have gone through Oaksterdam. So many of my friends and colleagues have
110,000.
Yeah, and some people went for a weekend, and some weekend courses, and other people have gone for longer classes. And I mean, they've done so much. Coming from culinary school, I'm not the hugest fan of culinary school for education, but I feel like with Oaksterdam, it's a little bit different. I feel like it's a lot less expensive than culinary school, for one thing. And you can do it on demand now, but also you can pair it with growing, just like you can cook at your house, you can grow plants at your house, but it can empower you to get a job in the industry.
So 110,000 people from 116 countries have gone through Oaksterdam. So a lot of people were seeing Oaksterdam on the news, coming to Oakland, learning about the cannabis industry and taking it home. And that's why they have a big impact. To your point about culinary school, that's interesting though, is being a chef it's a creative job, right? There's technical skills you can learn, like a photographer or a writer or an artist, but there's also that innate piece of you that understands this thing that can't be taught.
Well, there's the whole mentorship side of the culinary industry where I talk about this on my show a lot, but it's it's passed down from generations of chefs, right? So you work under somebody as an apprentice and you learn all the skills from them. And then you make it your own and then you pass those down to somebody else. And I believe that the cannabis world is a lot like that too. And, I think there was a lack of information out there, and there was a lot of people, if you didn't know the right person, it was hard to get in. Now, slowly but surely, you can go be a water boy for somebody and water plants or go trim. A lot of people got started trimming at a very young age. Yeah, and so many people. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's working your way up in any industry is a great way to do it. If you want to be in the restaurant industry and you can't get a job in the kitchen, you can be a busser. You can go.
It's the only way to do it is to understand the whole business.
Go wash dishes.
Yeah.
And same thing. Go clean pots. Go clean pots for whatever grower. If you can get in, you can get in, and hopefully someone likes you and they see that you have good work ethic, and then you can grow with the company, or you can grow out of the company and then, evolve into something else.
You can't teach that innate part of you that understands how to pair flavors or come up with creative things to cook. And it's the same thing with breeding, right? Like you can't teach a photographer to have an eye. Yeah. You can teach them all the skills to use a camera, but you can't teach them how to see. Right. And I think it's the same thing with chefs and breeders.
Yeah, but I think a lot of stuff through repetition, you got to start with the repetition part, because a lot of people, they have a natural gift for some stuff, but unless you put it at the hours, you'll never get good.
Well, that's exactly it, right? You can have that innate sense in you, but if you don't understand the technical skills, you can't perform.
Yeah.
Same with writing.
And it takes lots. I know firsthand. I am such a better writer after working with you. It's incredible. I feel like if you look at how the first draft came out, and then as you got me to rewrite stuff and think about what I'm writing and how I'm constructing sentences and paragraphs and trying to tie it all in together, because you had a specific way of doing that, which was very different than my way. Was like, let's just throw it out there. And it's like, no, you need to have a introduction that kind of says it all. And then you write about
inverted pyramid.
Yes.
You put everything at the top and then you expand on it. Well, that's the thing, right? I've always considered myself a writer. I've always loved writing. I did not become a good writer until I became a good editor.
Yeah, I believe it. Well, and sometimes it takes stepping outside the box a little bit so you can see what's going on.
And I fell into this niche of cannabis because I did one cannabis book, I did another cannabis book, and now I know more about cannabis than anyone who's never grown cannabis, bred cannabis, been a cannabis doctor.
Yeah. Well, and you know it from so many different perspectives.
Right. And I've known from the authors that I've worked with that that's something that they've liked working with me, is that I can kind of extract things out of what they wrote and beat it up and question it in a way that someone who's not a medical professional or a grower or a breeder could never do.
Yeah. And you were able to get me on task every day, which is something that's a challenge for, the best of the people that I've worked with. And I guess sometimes you just have a good relationship with people, and there's, something where you can sync up, and I work better with some people than other people, and I have a specific style, but I'm also a workhorse. I don't mind being the workhorse. I just need to have a path, and then I need to dedicate each morning to doing that.
That's what I was going to say. I'm a great organizer. I'm a great editor, a great manager, but I'm only as good as the person I'm working with. And that was all you for staying on task and actually taking it and running with it.
Yeah. And I think, just waking up knowing that this is what I'm going to do for the day, and I need to knock this list out. And sometimes it wouldn't be that day, it would be the next day or the day after that. But I would wake up and put energy into it every day and prioritize it. I think a lot of times in life, we just got to prioritize stuff.
I think maybe you had an innate understanding of the fact that a book like this did not exist yet. And that you were creating the base that a lot of people were going to work from. And there was a responsibility that comes with being able to build something like that. And I wonder a little bit if that's kind of what motivated you to finish the book, was the fact that you knew that that's what you were doing.
I was told by somebody that I couldn't do it and I wouldn't have a book by Christmas or the year after, that it would take a lot longer. And also I was 46 years old at the time, and I had told people that I was going to have a book out, and that was 4 years before. And I realized that this was my last shot at doing it. And if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to happen, and I was going to give up. And I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to tell people that I was going to do something that I didn't do. So there was all these different pressures pushing me forward, wanting me to be successful. And I would remind myself of those things when I was feeling lazy. So, and I'm kind of like, I'm just wired like that too. Like I can create my own type of stress. So and I'm a high functioning, I function really well under stress, but not high functioning alcoholic, but I'm a high functioning person under stressful situations. And that comes from the kitchen too. And where you have this long line of tickets and orders that have to go out. And, it's like, no one's going to come save you. You got to pull your pants up, look at those tickets and just do it as fast as you can. And I think a lot of times people are just they're waiting for someone to come save them. And that person's never coming.
I was a bartender and waitress in downtown San Francisco before I got into cannabis, and I still have anxiety dreams about the tickets stacking up and getting the plates out on time.
I have nightmares. It's been a while since I had a nightmare about the ticket counter, but like the ticket machine just running or the ticket machine breaking. Those are the two where you got tickets on the floor or the ticket machine is broken and the restaurant's packed. And that's happened several times. And, I guess that's why I still have that reoccurring nightmare. But
mine is the restaurant is packed. I'm the only bartender and waitress.
Yeah.
I still have that dream to this day, and I haven't worked there in like 20 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Really amazing. So if there was one piece of advice that you could give your younger self coming into the cannabis space, since we have a lot of people in cannabis watching this show, what would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, see, that's interesting because I was never trying to get into the cannabis space, right? Like that was never a goal of mine, was to work into cannabis.
So don't do it, right?
Right. There's, and it's okay. So that's a hard question also because the cannabis space is really hard right now.
It is.
There aren't a lot of opportunities the way there used to be. I think that's a temporary situation until federal law changes. But I would say, so here's what I would say, right? As someone who's a professional writer and editor, I wrote for 5 years for free. Anybody who would publish me, I wrote for them. I did not care if I was getting paid or not because I believed in myself enough to know that if I got my writing out there, that someone would eventually pay for me.
Yeah.
Took 5 years, but then I had a very solid career built on people paying for what I could write and what I could do. So if this is something you actually really believe in and you want to do, especially creative work, chef's work, writing work, artistic work, right? Just do it. Just keep creating, just keep building. Eventually, if you stay the course and you work that side hustle, you will get it.
Well, so that was going to be my next question is if somebody wants to get into writing about cannabis, that they're passionate about it, what would the best route be? And just do it.
I would tell them not to focus on cannabis. 100%, right? Like don't pigeonhole yourself to cannabis. That's been like one regret I've felt in many ways is that I felt I got pigeonholed into cannabis because it's a niche that I fell into, right? Again, I've still today, I'm going out of my way to work on projects that aren't cannabis based.
Yeah.
There's more to this world than cannabis. I know so much about cannabis. It's so easy for me to continue to produce content about cannabis.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things that matter. And to
me, there's mushrooms, there's all kinds of other things.
Oh, the mushroom industry is like a whole other thing. But the more I've learned like about healthcare and cannabis, like cannabis has opened my mind to so many other things, the more I felt compelled to write about other healthcare topics.
Yeah.
And I hope that we can start looking at cannabis outside of the box of cannabis and into how cannabis is going to change how we do other things.
Yeah. I like it.
Breeding, medicine, lifestyle.
Drug discovery and all these things. Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to healthy living we were talking about earlier.
Drug discovery, like that topic itself, like still kind of irks me a little bit, right? Because it's still based on this premise that we're going to find this one thing that's going to cure or treat your problem. And you'll never find this one thing that's going to cure or treat your problem. Only you can cure or treat your problem.
But drug discovery is like that one thing that we can patent. Right? So that's kind of what it is. It's like that one thing that we can patent that does this for this, or that it took us these steps and we had to do this type of extraction. And, they're drug discovery. But the thing is like I see drug discovery as an amazing thing because it's like, okay, so we've done all these tests like they do in Israel, where we have these double-blinded tests and we're looking at large populations of groups and we're trying to solve problems. I'm a problem solver as it is. Everything I do is to solve a problem. And so I like the whole drug discovery from that perspective. It's like, can we solve a problem with this? And the more we know about it, the more problems we can solve. And maybe we can get rid of ulcerative colitis and autoimmune disease someday. And maybe it won't just be cannabis, but maybe it will be this combination of stuff. But that is the drug discovery. It won't be just
cannabis,
no,
right?
But I think that's the beauty of drug discovery. It's like the more we know, the more informed we are, the more we can make better decisions. And maybe we will find something that makes a difference. Maybe it won't be the only thing, but maybe it's something special and unique.
Well, what's important about this drug discovery thread is that through trying to understand these single molecules, we understand the mechanisms of action and how they work in the body, right? It's like how we found Ozempic, is understanding the GLP-1 and how that affects your appetite, right? So these things are important. Like I have this like conflict when it came to learning about medical cannabis and going to these medical cannabis conferences and hearing them talk about these new cannabinoids they discovered and the pathways they work on is like, wow, this knowledge we have about how these cannabinoids interact with our body is so important. The conclusion is always, so we're going to make a product that you can buy based on it, right? And like that is the wrong conclusion. Of course, that conclusion is what drives the study. So there's like this weird balance with it. But patients in particular need to take some more control of their own healthcare, more autonomy of what's going on. And that's how they're really going to find their answers.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, because it's all subject to the individual, so much of it. And we all need different things and we all have such different body chemistry.
Well, with autoimmune diseases, especially something like Crohn's disease in particular, a lot of this comes down to the balance of bacteria in your gut that interacts with your immune system. And like what's going on in my gut is not identical to what's going on in the gut of somebody else with Crohn's disease, right? What's going on in my gut in the morning is not the same thing as what's happening to it in the evening or after eating this food or that food. Like when we actually start studying nature, we start understanding diversity. And the problem with diversity is there's never one like single solution to anything. It's always more complex and complicated.
Well, and for thousands of years, we ate so seasonally, you know, and it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years, you know, as long as we've been on this earth. And now we have tomatoes year round.
Well, but people like me, I eat seasonally, right? I base most of my food off of a vegetable box that comes from local organic growers who are growing seasonal produce once a week. And that's how I plan my meals, is based on what the fruits and vegetables that are going to come to me. And that's difficult. Like not everyone can do that. I understand that not everyone has the time to cook their own meals, but I feel better for it.
Right. Really cool. So if people are trying to find you on the internet or out there, how do they go about it?
Luckily, I've got a pretty unique name. And I secured all handles on all social media with my own name right away. So if you look for Angela Bacca on Instagram, Twitter, Gmail, it's me.
I got your TikTok.
No, I don't have a TikTok.
I know, I got yours.
Oh, okay. No. I don't do TikTok. I'm too old for that shit.
Me too. Me too. But you are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Gmail, Facebook, all the...
Yeah, you can check out my books at flowervalley.press. And what's funny about this is my publishing company, Flower Valley Press, is not a cannabis name, even if people seem to think it is. It's based on my hometown, Lompoc, which is the flower seed capital of the world, and we call it the Flower Valley. So that's where that name comes from. It also happened to become like a huge cannabis capital in California very recently, which is part of why I moved home.
It's pretty wild how it just overnight became this huge thing in Santa Barbara County, right?
Yeah.
And so because the county accepted it so, you know, and large scale, it was the one place in California you could really scale.
Santa Barbara County was always going to become the epicenter of cannabis cultivation in California, whether people up north liked it or not. And part of the reason is because it's 75 and sunny year round and we have greenhouses everywhere.
There's cut flower greenhouses everywhere.
There were cut flower greenhouses everywhere. There was a federal trade pact with Ecuador and Colombia in the early 2000s that we agreed to buy cut flowers from Ecuador and Colombia in exchange for trying to cut off the flow of cocaine to the United States. And what that did was put out all of the local flower growers in my hometown and southern Santa Barbara County, northern Santa Barbara County. So when Prop 64 was on the ballot, a lot of those greenhouses went up for sale and they got snapped up real fast. So now we're producing a third of the legal cannabis in California. My hometown, Lompoc, which has been described by our Congressman Luke Scarmazzo as the armpit of his district, right? It's a beautiful place on the coast, has the most poverty in Santa Barbara County.
Wow.
We passed a law after Prop 64 passed in California where we're like, no rules over the state, no taxes over the state, no license caps. everything goes, right? So we have lounges, we have a rotating scene of dispensaries with a population of 40,000.
Wow.
We have the only cannabis testing lab in the county. We have 2 of the largest extractors in the state there. And we're surrounded by either wineries and grape farms or cannabis farms all around. So I got some FOMO and moved home.
Nice. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I look forward to doing this again soon with our next book.
Got to take a break before the next book.
Right. Absolutely. But yeah, it was a blast. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.